Thanks, Ken Corla. Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually a hugely important aspect of the bill. And like Deputy Wallace, I previously had the privilege of being a witness on behalf of Margaretta Darcy and Niall Farrell in their court cases for being brought before the courts for allegedly interfering with the proper use of Shannon Airport. And I think it does get to the heart of what we're discussing here, because it would be completely wrong to ignore the giant elephant in the room. That is the fact that Shannon Airport does operate as, in essence, a sort of an ancillary or key part of the US war machine. And without that business and that volume of traffic going on, it will be a very different place. And I suppose the issue is that are some of the measures being brought in this part of the bill being done to, on the one hand, curtail the protesters which have inevitably gathered there as a result of it being an appendage of the US military, and are we enshrining sufficiently the state's necessity to fulfil our international obligations under human rights law, to protect our neutrality and ensure that we as a country are not engaged in activities which undermine citizens in other parts of the globe. And I think that is the purpose of the amendments that we have put forward here today. Now, Deputy Wallace has obviously forgotten that since the last time round, Margaretta Darcy has actually had a birthday, and we now have a situation today where an 80-year-old woman was transited earlier today to Limerick Prison for a 2-week custodial sentence because she wouldn't sign a bond and give an undertaking that she would not interfere or go onto the runway at Shannon Airport again. And as a result of that, she has begun today serving again a sentence in Limerick Prison, and I want to salute her and stand in her shadows, to be honest, because this woman is absolutely magnificent. About 4 weeks ago, she and her colleagues in Shannon Watch gave a presentation to the Petitions Committee about how over the past decade and more they have consistently protested at that facility because of the ongoing use of Shannon to facilitate the US war machine. And during that presentation, Margaretta Darcy said she highlighted the fact that the runway was being given over in a sponsored event for a suicide charity, that there would be a little walk on the runway or a run on the runway. And she felt it was an appalling affront to the victims of suicide, and that the airport will be given over for such a measure, when in the normal course of event the runway was being used to facilitate the slaughter of innocents. And she said that she would prefer to go onto that runway and blow herself up than be part of a state that would condone or turn a blind eye to our participation in what's going on. And it's in that same vein, I suppose, that we put forward these amendments here before, because Shannon Airport is not a proper airport. I made the point at second stage that during the course of the trial of Margaretta Darcy and Niall Farrell 2 weeks ago, Tom Clonan, the Irish Times defence correspondent, made the point that he had been engaged in discussions with the leadership of Hezbollah, and they pointed out that they were very disappointed with the Irish state that we facilitated Shannon as a vehicle. And he said, he didn't say Shannon, he said your airport in County Clare, which the journalist made the point, and probably not unaccurately, how many people in Ireland know that Shannon Airport is in County Clare, but a lot of people, clearly the leadership of Hezbollah know exactly where it is, and they were disappointed that a neutral country would facilitate the American war machine in the context that Ireland is. And what does that do? Well, it exposes Irish peacekeeping troops who are presently in Syria and other areas of the Middle East to unwanted attention in those areas, exposes Ireland as a potential target, as it were, not to mind, of course, and not being selfish about it, but that is an issue that maybe people in Ireland don't take consequence enough. But critically as well, it is the role that we're playing in the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I would put it that without Shannon, a lot of that activity could not have continued. And I think we need to look at that. I mean, there is legislation in Ireland in Horgan versus An Taoiseach, for example, where it was deemed that the use of Shannon was in breach of our neutrality. But the judiciary felt at that time that while they deemed that it wasn't permissible for us to allow troops move across who were engaged in belligerent activity and so on, they felt it was beyond the remit of the judiciary to make a point about that, that it was up to the legislators. And we as legislators, at every turn, every relevant minister, every rota of ministerial questions, we try and get answers on this issue, and we as legislators haven't been able to address this issue, and it is with a huge sense of frustration. I mean, earlier this month I asked for the figures of what were the countries of origin of the aircraft that landed in Shannon, because we'd asked the Minister for Defence previously and he said he didn't know. We had to have to ask the Minister for Foreign Affairs. So we asked the Minister for Foreign Affairs and he gave us a list of 35 countries in the past 12 months, which kind of looked like a big list. Half the countries you wouldn't have even heard of them. Sounded harmless enough, but of course what they left out was the number of occasions in which each of those countries landed. So we had to ask them last week, sorry, you didn't actually finish the question, how many times did those countries actually land? Now that was a bit peculiar because we lost 24 countries between the answer that we got on the 1st of July and the answer on the 8th of July. But that information to me was quite illuminating, because you read through the list of what were the countries that sought permission to land in Shannon in the past 12 months. And there were 11 of them. And the figures were as follows: Bahrain 1, Belgium 2, Canada 5, Croatia 3, Egypt 4, which is a bit worrying to be honest. I don't know why Egypt will be landing 4 times in Shannon Airport, and I'm wondering, is it a case of my friend can land here or something? But anyway, France 7, Germany 4, Italy 8, Malaysia 1, Mexico 1, USA 630. Now, we have consistently tabled here is, why are these hugely expensive, wide-bodied aircraft which carry military personnel toing and froing twice a day across our airspace, landing 630 times in the last 12 months, and the government with a straight face say that they're not carrying any arms, they're not involved in any military activity? Get accurate information on this. But the idea that 630 occasions in the last 12 months that these hugely expensive aircraft are landing on our shores, that they are not engaged in military activity, to be quite honest, is laughable. And former Minister Shatter put the challenge down to us to say we had no evidence to say that they were carrying arms. I would put it, the onus is not on us. In amendments deal with the issue of our requirement to search aircraft, and this is a section which deals with the power of authorised officers at the airport, and our amendment specifically seeks to add in to that section that these authorised officers would be required to conduct searches on such aircraft. And I was trying to make the point to explain why that was necessary, and all of the channels that we have gone through to try and get this issue dealt with, only to be ignored at every turn, how protesters down in Shannon have done everything in their power to highlight it, how the judiciary have dealt with this issue and said it's a matter for the legislature. I would add to that how over 100 complaints have been tabled with An Garda Síochána to seek a searching of these aircraft, and it has not been done. So the purpose of our key amendment here today is to require that the authorised officer whose power the minister is changing or specifying in this legislation would deal with the issue of searching of aircraft. And the reason and the legislative basis for doing this is a couple of points. Now, as the minister knows, the Air Navigation and Transport Act, which is covered in this amendment, is really the domestic legislation which gives effect to the Chicago Convention. And the Chicago Convention monitors how we deal with civil aircraft aircraft and so on. And it has been deemed that any country has autonomy over its airspace and sovereignty, and that we can lay down our own rules. Now, what I'd like to put to you is that the Air Navigation Foreign Military Aircraft Order in 1952 provides that every foreign military aircraft flying over or landing in the state must be, and this is the quote, on the express invitation or with the express permission of the Minister, shall comply with such stipulations as the Minister may make in relation to such aircraft. Now, when we have raised this issue, we've been given assurances that all of the aircraft, and in the last 12 months I've just said there were 630 of them from the USA, that the Irish state is confident that they haven't been and they quoted that they have been unarmed, they carry no arms, ammunitions or explosives, that they do not engage in intelligence gathering, and that the flights in question do not form any part of military exercises or operations. But the legislation doesn't actually stipulate that. So I'm wondering, has that been decided by a subsequent ministerial order, and when was that criteria put in place? But I would also put it to you that that criteria is not being monitored. It's not been adhered to, because you never carry out any searches. Neither the Defence Forces, who've been present over 300 occasions in the past year, or on Garda Síochána have carried out any searches. Yet we know from evidence of, for example, Tom Clonan, who's been on board some of those aircraft, that weaponry has been present. We know from the mistake that appeared when the weaponry was on the outside of the aircraft last year that indeed a lot of them do. And we know from US military policy that soldiers are not allowed to travel without their weaponry, so they don't leave them coming across on a Ryanair plane later after them. They have to be with them, and you will not know until you search. And I would echo the points made by Deputy Wallace in that regard, that the onus is on us, and we will be doing a good thing and fulfilling our international obligations if we did actually pay attention to that regard. Now, Okay, so in terms of the actual motions as they're there, the first motion, if you like, seeks to deal with the issue of changing the Act which said the Minister was proposing to stop a person, where this says to stop a person at the airport for the exercise of any of his or her powers under the section. And the reason why that's been proposed is a fear of what lies behind this amendment. Originally, in the Air Traffic Navigation Act, the wording was quite specific, and I suppose what people are concerned about is that to stop a person without any qualifying issue on that gives them a total carte blanche to stop anybody anywhere for any reason whatsoever. So what our amendment is doing is say that the person can only be stopped for the exercise of the powers under this section. Now, the Minister may feel, well, that's implied anyway. And maybe it is, I don't know, but the fact that we're specifying it is, I think that that's actually a helpful provision in that regard. The second amendment deals with the issue of deleting a section which refers specifically to the inclusion of part of the bylaws that are already in existence and brings it into this primary legislation. Now, you could say, well, sure, the bylaw is there anyway, and we know the bylaw is there anyway, but the point is, why are you bringing a bit of it into the main body of the legislation? And that has caused extreme concerns. That is this airport being singled out for special treatment? Is it a measure which has been brought in to enhance the powers of the state or authorised officers, which this section deals with, in order to deal with the legitimate community protests which are present in that area? The next two amendments are linked. And they deal with the issue of human trafficking, smuggling, kidnapping or other illegal transportation of persons. And this is specifically to deal with, as Deputy Wallace referred, the issues of renditions and other unlawful activity, which it has been established without any question or doubt has been facilitated by the use of Shannon Airport. And we only have to look at the Irish Times editorial in April of last year, which deals with the research that was done on rendition flights from the States, and which made the point, if you like, that a lot of this practice was facilitated by Ireland, and we think that is something which we have a responsibility under human rights and civil legislation to actually incorporate in this body of legislation that's dealing with Shannon Airport. If we don't do it, we're being a little bit remiss. And the next amendment after that sort of says if an authorised officer did come across any such activity as facilitating human trafficking, renditions or whatever, that the onus is on that authorised officer then to immediately intervene and seek assistance for that person. But the most important amendment of the group that we have is to include in this the power of an authorised officer to search. And in the context of all of the points that I made previously, in the context of the fact that time and again Irish people have spoken out about their desire for this country to adhere to its policy of neutrality, I think we have an onus to search, because there is no way that these aircraft are travelling around the world twice a day, landing on average in Ireland twice a day for nothing, not carrying arms, not involved in anything. They must have some amount of holidays in the US military with that volume of traffic. Clearly that's not the case. The dogs on the streets know they're carrying weapons, and they know that neutrality is in breach. And I would put it to the Minister in much the same way as Deputy Dooley did earlier: in your remaining hours in this brief, we're not looking for anything extra. We do have a power under the Chicago Convention, under the Air Navigation and Transport Act. We have the right to control our own airspace, to put our own conditions. We want you to put in this condition, which is lawful anyway, but put it in the body of the Act of Shannon Airport, because you can't talk about Shannon without talking about the US military, and I think we would urge you to include it in that regard.
Thank you, Deputy. And I'll call on Deputy Ellis.
Thank you, Carol. Just in case I forget, just to wish you good luck, just in case you do change posts. Everyone else has done it, so I just wouldn't like to be the one left out. And